Get your CGR shirts and glassware at ClassicGameRoom.com. Classic Game Room is brought to you by Magnum Skywolf. CGR is supported by fans on Patreon. Thank you. Welcome to a special Classic Game Room competitive review, because today I'm comparing two of the greatest game systems in the history of the universe. The Super Nintendo versus the Sega Genesis. Which game system should you have? Which game system should you be collecting for? The short answer is both, because they're both amazing and have massive catalogs of 16-bit games. The Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis have great games. They have terrible games and a whole lot of mediocre ones, and licensed crap. If you're looking to collect Nintendo exclusives like Mario, Zelda, Metroid, well, the choice is easy. You buy the Super Nintendo. If you're looking to play Sonic and Truxton and MUSHA and Herzog Zwei and a massive selection of spaceship shooters and other oddball games like Cyborg Justice, you go Sega Genesis or Mega Drive. Same thing. Which game system has the better controller? Well, it's almost a tie. Personally, I'm Sega Genesis fanboy Mark, so I'll be honest, I'm biased. The Sega Genesis controller is superior. There's a 3-button option and a 6-button version. But the Super Nintendo controller is really good too, and both the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis have loads of aftermarket controllers available. A lot of them are cheap online too. When it comes to looks, the Sega Genesis wins hands down, especially the Model 1 versus the American Super Nintendo, which looks kind of awkward with its purple buttons and weird styling. It does have a 1-800-HELP number on the back though, with Mario holding a screwdriver. If that means anything to you. The European Super Nintendo is a better looking game system. On the whole, the Sega products will cost you less money, unless you get into some of the fancier spaceship shooters and games like Truxton. Don't blame me for inflating the price of Truxton. It's not my fault that it's a good game and in short supply. The Super Nintendo itself is usually more expensive to purchase, and the games, especially the popular Nintendo ones like Zelda and Mario, are way more expensive. The Sega Genesis has blast processing, which is always fun. It also has the Sega CD add-on and the Sega 32X, which allows you to play Cosmic Carnage. The Super Nintendo... There's just no equivalent to the 32X on the Super Nintendo, is there? Someone needs to invent that. The Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis are fun to talk about because they bring us back to the console wars, the legitimate console wars, back when game systems were actually different. Because the Genesis and the Super Nintendo are both 16-bit game systems, right? But they look totally different. And they sound completely different. When used properly, the Genesis is the greatest sounding game system in history. Look no further than MUSHA and Technosoft games like Herzog Zwei and Thunder Force. But then you've got the amazing Super Mario Bros. Games and Zelda and stuff on the Super Nintendo. When it comes to game selection, you're in luck because they both have monstrous game catalogs, especially the Sega Genesis, which wasn't quite as selective. So you got a lot of crap on there like Fighting Masters, watch my review. In fact, I've reviewed loads of games for both of these game systems. You can watch and see the differences. You can hear the differences. Now sure, there's the big ones that I've talked about like, Truxton. And then you've got Super Mario World. I mean, there's the really huge games, but there's also a lot of obscure stuff on both game systems that you may have never heard about. Mark, what do you think? Well, you already know the answer. I'm Sega Genesis fanboy Mark. I grew up with the Genesis. I love it. If you grew up with the Super Nintendo, odds are you love it. Maybe it's time to collect for the Genesis. As well, I've been playing and collecting a lot of Super Nintendo stuff over the past few years doing the show and have found loads of great games that I've really enjoyed. The Super Nintendo's got the whole Mode 7 thing, which is a really neat look. There's games like Mario Kart. Then again, the Sega Genesis brings the blast processing. There's no shortage of amazing games to play on both game systems, which is why I can't give you a clear answer. Choose the game system that you want to buy based on the games that you want to play. Watch my reviews, watch other people's reviews, read stuff online, but don't watch crappy top 10 videos. Watch reviews from somebody who actually played the game and didn't steal the footage from someone else. If your budget is tight, you may want to go Sega Genesis. Super Nintendo does cost a little bit more. You could also buy something like the Retron 5, which plays them both. Super Nintendo versus Sega Genesis. It's the classic console war, and there is no clear winner because they're both good. Occasionally, in these competitive reviews, I'll come across two game systems where the choice is obvious. Hyperscan versus Neo Geo MVS. You know, I'm just gonna go Neo Geo on that one. But Sega Genesis versus Super Nintendo, you win either way. They're both great. Highly recommended. Have fun collecting. If you're going to buy the game anyway, buy it through ClassicGameRoom.com. Classic Game Room is supported by fans on Patreon. Thank you. Now prepare for the Lord Carnage Club, where I celebrate these backers on Patreon by shouting their name in a volcano! Derek Langley. Beer is the trick. Steven Chucknick. From New Jersey! Michael Fernandez! People not named Michael Fernandez aren't Michael Fernandez. Al Stiver! Woo! EDM! Jason from British Columbia. Philipp Straubenmueller from Vienna, Austria. Cue the thunder. Jeff, Captain Dauntless, Briar. Cue the lava. I don't know what lava sounds like. It sounds like this. Jack Stavris from Australia. Ohad Kane, Master of Thunder. Chip Senkbeil, Fighter of Space Bees. Woo! Rick DeBarros gets the extra disco. Michael and Ariana Nelson, Fighters of the Future. That's enough disco, because now it's time to shout, Busy Signal! That's right, and keep the volume loud and the party rocking for Sean Zoltek. Really? No. Sean Zoltek! Sergio Matthias Hergert! Tubular. Will.